St. George Street looks timeless. But what you're really walking through is over 450 years of layered history. This isn't just a tourist street. It's the original spine of America's oldest city. And almost everything you see here has been destroyed, rebuilt, abandoned, and brought back to life. St. George Street begins, conceptually at least, with the founding of St. Augustine by Pedro Menéndez de Avilés in 1565. The Spanish didn't build cities randomly. They followed a planned grid system, influenced by earlier European and later codified in the laws of the Indies. While those laws were formalized after St. Augustine's founding, the same principles were already in use. A central plaza, today's Plaza de la Constitución, streets running in a logical rectangular pattern, narrow roadways designed for shade and defense. One of those streets would become St. George Street, a main north-south access of this early colonial layout. It likely followed the path connecting the northern entrance to the city, near today's city gate, to the central plaza and administrative core. By the late 1600s and early 1700s, the street was already lined with coquina and wooden houses, courtyards and gardens, residences of soldiers, artisans, and minor officials. Some structures along the street today, like reconstructed first-period homes, trace back to this era, often based on archaeological foundations. In 1763, Spain ceded Florida to Britain. This period had a profound impact on St. George Street. Many Spanish residents left, abandoning homes. The British demolished or altered structures. Property lots were reorganized and repurposed. Several original Spanish buildings along St. George Street were destroyed during this period, which is why so many historic buildings today are reconstructions. But the street itself remained. Its alignment and importance did not change. Spain regained Florida in 1784, and St. George Street came back to life. Spanish officials and settlers reoccupied the city, joining the recently arrived Menorcans. New coquina houses and shops were built on older foundations. The street became a mixed-use corridor, residential, commercial, and civic. By the early 1800s, this street was a working town street, not a tourist destination. Homes like the Paradas House, later Dodge's Curiosity Shop, were built during this period. After 1821, when the United States took control of Florida, St. George Street evolved again. Anglo-American residents moved in, Protestant institutions appeared, including Trinity Parish at the south end of the street. The architecture began blending Spanish, British, and American styles. Through the 1800s, St. George Street was simply a part of daily life. It was a rough, sandy road, lined with balconied houses, shops, and boarding spaces, and traveled by pedestrians, horses, and wagon traffic. Historic photos show muddy streets, mixed residential and commercial use, a modest, somewhat worn townscape. This wasn't yet the polished historic destination people see today. It was a real, working street in a small southern town. The arrival of Henry Flagler transformed St. Augustine, but interestingly, not St. George Street directly. Flagler focused on luxury hotels like the Ponce de Leon Hotel and the Alcazar, rail connections bringing wealthy tourists. While his developments were just outside the colonial core, they saved the historic district indirectly. Tourism created value in preservation of old St. Augustine. St. George Street remained intact rather than redeveloped. By the early 1900s through the 1950s, St. Augustine's reputation suffered. Many historic buildings fell into disrepair. Some were demolished. The street risked becoming just another neglected downtown. This period is crucial. St. George Street nearly disappeared as a historic place. St. Augustine had become rough around the edges. The 1950s through the 1970s is arguably the most important chapter in the street's modern identity. the state of Florida created the historic St. Augustine Preservation Board. They conducted archaeological excavations, reconstructed Spanish colonial buildings, and turned parts of the street into a living history museum. As a result, buildings like the Gallego House, Salcedo House, and others were rebuilt on original foundations. The street was reshaped to reflect its 18th century appearance. Traffic was reduced and eventually eliminated. This is when St. George Street became what people recognize today. By the late 1900s, St. George Street became a pedestrian-only corridor. Shops, restaurants, and museums filled the restored buildings. It became the centerpiece of St. Augustine tourism. Importantly, there are no cars, and it is designed entirely for walking. This created a European-style historic promenade. Today, St. George Street is the most visited street in St. Augustine. It is a continuous stretch of historic homes, both original and reconstructed, courtyards and gardens, museums and shops. It still follows the same street plan laid out in the 1500s and 1600s. It contains layers of history, from its Spanish colonial foundations to the British era and American adaptations, and its 20th century preservation. While St. George Street is not purely authentic, in a sense of untouched continuity, many buildings are reconstructions. The street itself is real, continuous, and grounded historically. While tourism often obscures it, this street is deep and has a soul. Hey, thanks for watching. For more local history and content, don't forget to like and subscribe.